Alexander Alex Carrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, surveying the city skyline. At 42, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. As the CEO of an international logistics company, Alex had built his empire through a relentless pursuit of control and perfection. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your son is here to see you." "Send him in," Alex replied, his stern expression softening slightly. 10-year-old Max bounded into the room, clutching Claire's iPhone in his small hands. "Dad, what's a prenup?" Alex froze, his blood running cold. "Where did you hear that word, Max?" "It was in Mom's email," Max said innocently, holding up the phone with casual ease. Taking the device from his son, Alex's heart nearly stopped as he scanned the email chain between Claire and her divorce lawyer. They were planning to leave him, waiting for his father's inheritance to come through. But something had changed. "Max, why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a bit?" Alex said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to your mother." As Max left, Alex strode purposefully toward the elevator, his mind racing. He found Claire in their sprawling penthouse, lounging on a chaise with a fashion magazine in hand. "Care to explain this?" Alex said, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. Claire's face drained of color as she saw the screen. She snatched the phone, her eyes darting between it and Alex. "How dare you go through my private emails?" "Our son found it," Alex replied coldly. "Now explain." Claire's shoulders sagged before she straightened, a cold smile playing on her lips. "I was waiting for your dad's inheritance," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "But plans change." Alex felt as if he'd been punched in the gut, but he wasn't done. With a calm smile, he pulled out his own phone and showed Claire a series of damning photos, her locked in an intimate embrace with Mark, one of his top employees and an old friend. "You won't get a dime," Alex said softly. "You cheated. Remember the prenup?" Claire's shocked silence gave way to disbelief. "How do you know?" Without hesitation, Alex's voice turned to ice. "You're done. Pack your things tonight." Claire began to panic as she realized the magnitude of her mistake, but it was too late. Alex had already turned his back, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions. Mark Stevens sat in a dimly lit bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. His phone buzzed incessantly, Claire's name flashing on the screen with increasingly frantic messages. He knew their plan had unraveled spectacularly. Across town, Claire paced in a luxury hotel room, her designer luggage stark against the disheveled state of her appearance. She had underestimated Alex, but she wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, Alex stormed into Carrington Logistics, employees scattering before his thunderous expression. In his office, he immediately called his head of security. "I want Mark Stevens' access revoked. All of it. Now." His voice left no room for questions. But Mark was already a step ahead. Before his access was cut, he managed to funnel sensitive business information to several of Carrington Logistics' biggest competitors. Meanwhile, Claire was plotting her own revenge. Using her sharp social skills, she began reaching out to her extensive network, spreading rumors about Alex's crumbling empire and tarnishing his once flawless reputation. As Alex sat in his office reviewing the damage reports, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Victor Zorin on line 1 for you." Alex's eyes narrowed. Victor Zorin, the ruthless Russian oligarch who had been eyeing his company for years. Picking up the phone, his voice was cool and controlled. "Zorin. What can I do for you?" "Ah, Alexander," Zorin's heavily accented voice oozed false sympathy. "I heard about your recent troubles. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss that merger we've been dancing around." Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "Carrington Logistics is not for sale, Zorin. Not now, not ever." As he hung up, Alex realized he wasn't just fighting a personal betrayal, this was a direct threat to his entire empire. Alex sat across from Liam Quinn, a brilliant but morally ambiguous investigator he had hired to dig up dirt on Claire, Mark, and Zoran. Liam's findings were worse than Alex had imagined. "They've been stealing from the company for months," Liam explained, sliding a file across the desk. "They plan to bankrupt you, destroy your empire, and flee the country with the spoils." Alex's jaw clenched as he reviewed the evidence. At that moment, his phone rang. It was his CFO. "Sir, we have a problem. Zoran just launched a series of strategic moves that are crippling our supply chain." Hanging up, Alex knew he had to act fast. He arranged an emergency meeting with Zoran at an exclusive private club. The Russian oligarch sat across from him, smug and overconfident. "Your company is on its knees, Alexander," Zoran said. "I'm offering to buy you out at a fraction of its worth. It's more than generous, considering the circumstances." Alex leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes locking onto Zoran's. "You underestimate me, Zoran. This isn't over." As he left the meeting, Alex's mind was already formulating a plan. He wouldn't just survive this onslaught, he would annihilate all his enemies in the process. Back at his office, Alex initiated his counterattack. Using the evidence Liam had uncovered, he filed a countersuit against Claire and Mark, accusing them of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He then began systematically removing Mark's influence from within the company, firing his associates and cutting off his access to company funds. It was a surgical strike, precise and devastating. As night fell over the city, Alex stood at his office window, looking out at the empire he had built. The battle had only just begun, but Alexander Carrington was a man who played to win, and win he would, no matter the cost. Claire Carrington stood in the middle of her rented apartment, surrounded by designer luggage that looked out of place in the modest space. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped against her phone screen as she scrolled through her contacts. She needed an ally, someone who could help her turn the tables on Alex. Her finger hovered over a name. Andrea Wells. Investigative journalist. A cold smile played across Claire's lips as she hit the call button. "Andrea, it's Claire Carrington. I have a story for you. How would you like an exclusive on the dark side of Alexander Carrington's empire?" Across town, Alex sat in his office, reviewing the latest reports on the damage Claire and Mark had done. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Ms. Wells from the Tribune on line 1. She's asking for a comment on some allegations." Alex's eyes narrowed. So the war had begun in earnest. He picked up the phone, his voice cool and controlled. "Ms. Wells, what can I do for you?" Andrea wasted no time, laying out a list of accusations: corruption, abusive leadership, shady dealings. Alex listened silently, his mind already formulating a counter-strategy. When she finished, he spoke only 2 words. "No comment." He hung up and immediately dialed Liam Quinn. "I need everything you've got on Claire and Mark. Now." Days passed, and the city buzzed with rumors. Headlines screamed of Alex's alleged misdeeds, each more damning than the last. Claire watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on her face as she fed Andrea a steady stream of half-truths and fabrications. Mark, still smarting from his humiliating exit from Carrington Logistics, provided insider details that lent credibility to their claims. But Claire wasn't satisfied with merely tarnishing Alex's reputation, she wanted to hit him where it truly hurt. "I want full custody of Max," she told her lawyer, her voice hard. "Paint Alex as an unfit father. Use whatever means necessary." Max, caught in the crossfire, retreated into himself. At school, he overheard whispers about his father, saw the pitying looks from teachers. At home with Alex, he felt the tension, the barely contained fury that radiated from his father. He didn't understand what was happening, only that his world was falling apart. Alex, for his part, had anticipated this move. As Claire's lawyer filed for emergency custody, Alex's team was ready with a counterpunch. They leaked their own story to the press, a sordid tale of Claire's affair, her theft from the company, her manipulation of Max for her own gain. The public sympathy, fickle as always, began to shift. Claire soon found herself on the receiving end of scathing editorials and vicious social media attacks. Her carefully cultivated image as the wronged wife crumbled. In the courtroom, Alex's lawyers were relentless. They presented evidence of Claire's infidelity, her attempts to circumvent the prenup, her plans to flee the country with company funds. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with steely eyes, listened impassively. When the gavel fell, Claire's world collapsed. Custody is awarded to the father, Alexander Carrington. The mother, Claire Carrington, is granted supervised visitation pending further review. Claire stumbled from the courtroom, her designer heels clicking on the marble floors. Outside, a sea of reporters waited, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. She pushed past them, her face a mask of despair and rage. Moments later, Alex emerged, Max's small hand clutched in his. He faced the cameras, his expression grim but composed. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "My son and I ask for privacy during this difficult time." As they drove away, Max looked up at his father. "Dad, is it over now?" Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not yet, son," he said softly. "But it will be soon." Mark Stevens sat in a dingy motel room, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and crumpled papers. His laptop glowed in the dim light, displaying financial reports and internal memos from Carrington Logistics. He had been poring over them for days, searching for a weakness, any weakness, in Alex's armor. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He answered wearily. "Stevens. Mr. Stevens." The voice was heavily accented. "Russian. I believe we have a mutual interest in Alexander Carrington's downfall." Mark sat up straighter. "Who is this?" "A friend. One who can provide the resources you need to finish what you started." It was Zoran. Mark's mind raced. This was it, his last chance to strike back at Alex. "I'm listening," he said. Across the city, in his penthouse office, Alex was in the middle of a video conference when alarms began blaring from his computer. Red warning messages flashed across multiple screens. "Sir," his head of IT's panicked voice came through the speakers, "we're under attack, massive data breaches. Our logistics software is compromised. Shipments are being rerouted." Alex's face hardened. He had been expecting this, but the scale of the attack was beyond anything he had anticipated. "Initiate Protocol Omega," he ordered. As Carrington Logistics descended into chaos, Alex remained eerily calm. He watched as shipments were delayed, contracts were breached, and the company's stock price plummeted. His phone rang incessantly, board members, partners, media outlets, all demanding answers. In his secret command center, buried deep beneath Carrington Tower, Alex monitored the situation. Liam Quinn stood beside him, relaying real-time intelligence. "It's Mark," Liam confirmed. "He's working with a team of elite hackers. But there's more, he's got backing from Zoran." "Serious backing." Alex nodded, unsurprised. "And our countermeasures?" Liam grinned, his expression sharp. "In place and ready. Just say the word." Alex's finger hovered over a button on the console before him. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all those who had betrayed him, of Max, caught in the middle of this war. His jaw clenched. "Execute," he said. Across the city, in his motel room, Mark was celebrating. His laptop displayed the chaos unfolding at Carrington Logistics. Zoran was on speakerphone, his satisfaction evident even through the poor connection. "Excellent work, Mr. Stevens," Zoran purred. "Carrington is finished. I'll have my people draw up the acquisition papers immediately." Mark grinned, pouring himself another drink. "Here's to the fall of Alexander Carrington," he toasted. But as he raised the glass to his lips, his screen suddenly went black. Then, line by line, text began to appear. "Did you really think it would be that easy, Mark?" Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized that writing style. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." His phone died. The lights flickered and went out. In the darkness, he heard heavy footsteps approaching his door. Zoran, in his lavish Moscow office, frowned as his connection with Mark was suddenly cut. He barked orders at his subordinates, demanding to know what was happening. But as reports flooded in, frozen assets, raids on his properties, arrest warrants issued in multiple countries, he realized with growing horror that he had underestimated Alexander Carrington for the last time. Back in New York, Alex watched passively as FBI agents led a handcuffed Mark out of the motel. On another screen, he saw Zoran being escorted from his office by Russian authorities. Liam whistled low. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss." Alex didn't respond. He stared at the screens, at the empire he had saved, at the enemies he had destroyed. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt empty. His phone buzzed. A text from Mac's dad, "When are you coming home?" Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. "It's over," he said softly. "Let's go home." Claire Carrington stood in the lobby of Carrington Tower, her designer outfit a stark contrast to her haggard appearance. She clutched her handbag like a lifeline as she approached the receptionist. "I need to see Alex, Mr. Carrington," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please, it's urgent." The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, but she kept her composure. "One moment, please." In his office, Alex was reviewing the final reports on Zoran's takedown when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your ex-wife is here to see you." Alex's jaw tightened. He considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. "Send her up." When Claire entered, Alex was standing by the window, his back to her. She took a hesitant step forward. "Alex, save it," he cut her off, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of any warmth or recognition. "What do you want, Claire?" She flinched at his tone but pressed on. "I've made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I'll leave Mark, I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance." Alex laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Claire step back. "Another chance? You tried to destroy me, Claire. You used our son as a pawn in your little game. And now what? You think you can just blink your eyes and all will be forgiven?" He moved to his desk, pressing a button. A holographic display sprang to life, social media feeds, news articles, financial reports. "You're done, Claire. Your name is mud in every circle that matters. No one will hire you, partner with you, or even be seen with you in public." Claire's face crumpled as the reality of her situation sank in. "What have you done?" she whispered. "I ruined you," Alex said simply. "Just like you tried to ruin me. The difference is, I succeeded." Tears streamed down Claire's face as she sank into a chair. "What about Max? He needs his mother." Alex's expression hardened further. "You lost the right to call yourself his mother when you used him to try and hurt me. He's better off without you." As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Mark's lawyer. "Client willing to make a deal. Full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence." Alex showed the message to Claire, watching as the last bit of fight left her eyes. "It's over, Claire. Mark's going to prison, and he's taking what's left of your reputation with him." Claire stood on shaky legs, her world collapsing around her. As she reached the door, Alex spoke one last time. "Oh, and Claire, I bought out the Tribune. Andrea Wells won't be writing any more stories about me." Or you. The door closed behind her with a final, damning click. Alex turned back to the window, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt hollow. His phone buzzed again. "Max, Dad, can we have pizza tonight?" A small smile tugged at Alex's lips. Perhaps not completely hollow after all. In a maximum security prison upstate, Mark Stevens sat in his cell, staring at the blank wall. His lawyer had just left, confirming that his plea deal had been accepted. He would spend the next decade behind bars, but at least he had avoided the life sentence Zoran was facing. As night fell over New York, 3 lives lay in ruins. Claire, once the toast of high society, now a pariah, wandering the streets with nowhere to go. Mark, locked away, his ambitions turned to ash. And Zoran, his vast criminal empire dismantled, facing justice in a Russian court. At the top of it all stood Alexander Carrington, the man who had orchestrated their downfall. He had won, utterly and completely. Viktor Zoran stood at the window of his Moscow penthouse, a glass of vodka in his hand, staring out at the city lights. His reflection in the glass showed a man consumed by fury and obsession. Alexander Carrington had humiliated him, dismantled his operations, and left him a shell of his former self. But Zoran was far from finished. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's done. The syndicate is ready." Zoran's lips curled into a cold smile. He had spent months rebuilding his network, calling in favors from the darkest corners of the criminal underworld. Now, backed by an influential Eastern European crime syndicate, he was ready to strike back at Carrington with a vengeance. Across the ocean, Alex Carrington sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The past few months had been quiet, too quiet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, we have a situation." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "Sir, we're under attack. Massive cyber attacks across all our systems. Our firewalls are failing." Alex's jaw clenched. He had been waiting for this. Initiate Protocol Omega. Now. But as the hours ticked by, it became clear that this was no ordinary attack. Zoran had learned from his past mistakes. This time, he wasn't just targeting Carrington Logistics, he was going after Alex's entire empire. Banks reported suspicious activities in Alex's accounts. Stock prices plummeted as sensitive information was leaked to the media. Investors panicked, pulling out in droves. Alex stood in his war room, surrounded by screens displaying the chaos unfolding across his businesses. Liam Quinn burst in. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. Zoran's got a team of corrupt lawyers filing international lawsuits against us, environmental damage, labor violations, you name it. They're trying to bleed us dry." Alex's mind raced, calculating moves and countermoves. But before he could respond, another alert blared. His head of security's voice crackled over the intercom. "Sir, we detected an unauthorized entry at your private residence." "Max?" The line went dead. For the first time in years, Alex felt a cold fear grip his heart. "Get me to the house. Now." The drive to his mansion was a blur. As they approached, Alex saw signs of a struggle, broken glass, overturned furniture. He charged inside, calling for his son. "Dad!" Max's voice came from upstairs. Alex took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into his son's room. Max was huddled in a corner, shaken, but unharmed. Near the window lay a man in black, unconscious. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, pulling Max into a tight embrace. Max nodded, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I remember what you taught me about being prepared." Alex's throat tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. He had taught his son to be strong, to be a survivor. But at what cost? As security swarmed the house, Alex's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Carrington. Zoran's voice was smooth as silk. I trust one have your attention now. Alex's voice was cold fury. You've made a grave mistake, Zoran. Oh, I don't think so. This is just the beginning. I'm going to take everything from you, Carrington, your money, your power, your legacy. And when you have nothing left, when you're broken and begging for mercy, then I'll end you. The line went dead. Alex looked at Max, still clinging to him, then at the chaos around them. For a moment, doubt crept in. Had he underestimated Zoran? Had his arrogance put everything, and everyone he cared about, at risk? But as quickly as it came, the doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, implacable resolve. Zoran wanted a war. He'd give him one. Alex turned to Liam, who stood waiting for orders. Call the team. It's time we finish this, once and for all. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, its basement converted into a high-tech command center. Alex sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and operatives. Liam Quinn stood at his right hand, looking like he hadn't slept in days. All right, Alex said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Zoran thinks he's got us on the ropes. It's time we show him how wrong he is. Liam, what have you got? Liam tapped a tablet, and holographic displays sprang to life around the room. We've identified the key players in Zoran's syndicate, his money men, his enforcers, his political connections. They're spread across Eastern Europe and Asia, but they all report to this man. A photo appeared, a severe-looking man with cold eyes. Dmitry Volov. Zoran's right-hand man and the architect of the cyber attacks against us. Alex studied the face, committing it to memory. And our plan? We hit them where it hurts, Liam said, a sharp grin spreading across his face. We've got teams ready to move on their money laundering operations in Cyprus, their weapon caches in Ukraine, their drug routes through Turkey. When we're done, Zoran's entire network will be in chaos. Alex nodded, then turned to his head of legal affairs. And the lawsuits? The lawyer smiled thinly. We've got countersuits ready to file in every jurisdiction. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence of judicial bribery. When this gets out, half the judges on Zoran's payroll will be facing charges of their own. One by one, Alex's team laid out their strategies: financial attacks to freeze Zoran's assets, media campaigns to turn public opinion, backdoor diplomacy to ensure international cooperation in taking down the syndicate. As the meeting wound down, Alex stood. You all know what's at stake here. Zoran thinks he can destroy everything we built. We're going to show him the true meaning of destruction. Execute the plan. No mercy. No quarter. The team dispersed, each member heading out to set the gears of Alex's counterattack in motion. But as they filed out, Liam hung back. Boss, there's one more thing, he said, his voice low. I think I found a way to lure Zoran out into the open, but it's risky. Alex raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Liam outlined his plan, a false lead about a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai, too tempting for Zoran to resist. But it would require Alex to put himself in the line of fire. It's dangerous, Liam finished. But if it works, we can end this once and for all. Alex was silent for a long moment, weighing the risks. Then he nodded. Do it. But make sure Max is secure. I won't let Zoran use him against me again. As Liam left to set the trap, Alex stood alone in the command center. He thought of Claire, of Mark, of all the enemies he had vanquished to get here. Zoran was just the latest in a long line of those who had underestimated him. He would be the last. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Moscow apartment, Zoran received an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read the details of Carrington's supposed deal in Dubai. Prepare the jet, he barked at his assistant. We're going to the Middle East. The pieces were in place. The final battle was about to begin. Days later, Alex stood in the opulent lobby of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the world's business elite. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for Zoran to take the bait. That he didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance drew his attention. Victor Zoran strode in, flanked by bodyguards, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Alex. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Zoran smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and began making his way toward Alex. But before he could reach him, chaos erupted. Police swarmed in from every entrance, shouting orders in Arabic and English. Zoran's face contorted in rage as he realized he had been set up. "Carrington!" he roared, lunging forward. But it was too late. Officers tackled him to the ground, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Alex watched him passively as Zoran was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities. It was over. The man who had threatened everything he held dear was finished. As the dust settled, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Liam: "It's done. Volov and the others are in custody. The syndicate is finished." Alex allowed himself a small smile. He had won, again, but as he looked around at the chaos he had orchestrated, he felt no joy. No triumph. Just a hollow emptiness. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Mac's dad. "Are you okay? When are you coming home?" Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It was time to go home. Time to face the consequences of the world he had created months past. The world watched in awe as Victor Zoran's criminal empire crumbled, its tentacles severed one by one. Alexander Carrington emerged from the ashes stronger than ever, his company stock soaring to unprecedented heights. Alex stood in his newly renovated office, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. The skyline was dotted with buildings bearing the Carrington name, a testament to his expanding empire. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, not turning around. Max entered, now a young man of 16, the spitting image of his father. "The board is waiting, Dad. They're ready for your presentation on the Zoran acquisition." Alex nodded, allowing himself a small smile. He had taken control of Zoran's legitimate business assets, expanding his reach into markets he had only dreamed of before. His strategic mind had thrived in the aftermath of his victory, turning near defeat into unparalleled success. As they walked to the boardroom, Alex studied his son. Max had witnessed the darker side of his rise to power, had seen the ruthlessness required to survive in this world. But he had also seen his father's intelligence, his resilience, his unwavering determination. "Remember, Max," Alex said as they paused outside the boardroom. "In this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Always be prepared. Always be 3 steps ahead." Max nodded, his eyes serious. "I know, Dad. You've taught me well." For a moment, Alex saw a flicker of something in his son's eyes, admiration mixed with caution. Max respected his father's strength, his ability to overcome any obstacle. But he was careful not to emulate the cold ruthlessness that had defined Alex's path to the top. As the board meeting progressed, Alex laid out his plans for further expansion. The other executives listened in awe and fear. They knew that to cross Alexander Carrington was to court destruction. He had proven that with Claire. With Mark. With Zoran. Mercy and forgiveness were weaknesses he could no longer afford. Later that evening, Alex stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The city sprawled before him, a glittering testament to his power. For the first time in his life, he felt truly untouchable. He thought back to the day Max had innocently asked about prenups, setting in motion the chain of events that had led him here. He felt no regret for the choices he had made, the lives he had destroyed. In his mind, they had been obstacles to overcome, nothing more. The world was a battlefield, and Alexander Carrington had emerged the undisputed victor. As the sun set over his empire, Alex allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reign. And he was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, he heard Max's footsteps. His son joined him at the railing, looking out over the city. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Max said softly. "Everything you've built." Alex nodded, putting an arm around his son's shoulders. "And someday, it'll all be yours." Max was silent for a moment, then turned to face his father. "Dad, do you ever wonder, was it worth it?" The cost of getting here. Alex met his son's gaze, seeing in it a warmth and humanity that he himself had long since abandoned. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of doubt, but he pushed it aside. "In this world, Max, you take what you want, or you watch someone else take it from you. I chose to take it. Remember that." Max nodded slowly, turning back to the view, but Alex saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between admiration for his father's achievements and unease at the methods used to attain them. In that moment, Alex realized that while he had conquered the world, there was one thing he might never fully possess: his son's unquestioning allegiance to his worldview. Max would forge his own path, shaped by, but not beholden to, his father's legacy, and strangely, Alex found he was okay with that. Perhaps it was Max's role to be the one thing his empire had lacked: a moral compass. A reminder of the humanity he had sacrificed on his climb to the top. As night fell over the city, father and son stood side by side, overlooking the empire they would shape together. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities and challenges yet to come. Alexander Carrington had won his war. Now, with Max by his side, it was time to secure his legacy for generations to come. Story 2. Jack Thornton's sensible sedan rolled into the driveway of his modest suburban home at 4:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. The 35-year-old high school history teacher sighed. This wasn't how the annual Gettysburg field trip was supposed to end. "Damn you, Tommy Hawkins," Jack muttered, remembering the sickly pale face of the freshman who had decorated the tour bus floor with his lunch. The kid had claimed motion sickness, but Jack strongly suspected it had more to do with the 6 hot dogs Tommy had inhaled at the Battlefield Cafe. As he approached the front door, briefcase in hand, Jack heard his wife Sarah's hushed voice drifting through an open window. Sarah was many things, but quiet wasn't one of them. Curiosity piqued, he paused, his key hovering near the lock. "I'll be the best wife and mother to them until Jack gets his wealthy father's inheritance. Then I'll take everything in the divorce." Jack's world tilted on its axis. He must have misheard. There was no way his Sarah, the woman he had loved for 10 years, would say something like that. They had even talked about having kids, for Christ's sake. But as he stood there, rooted to the spot, Sarah's voice continued. "Don't worry, Robert, I've got it all planned out. Jack doesn't suspect a thing. He's such a Boy Scout, always so trusting. It's almost too easy." With trembling hands, Jack pulled out his phone and hit record, capturing the tail end of Sarah's conversation. I know, it's taking longer than we thought. But Jack's father isn't exactly on death's door. We just need to be patient. Once I have the money, we can start our new life together. Yes, I love you too. I'll call you later." The sound of Sarah's footsteps approaching snapped Jack out of his daze. He retreated to his car, fumbling with his keys before managing to start the engine and pull away. He drove aimlessly, his mind a chaotic whirlwind of betrayal and disbelief. Somehow, he found himself at a nearby park, the place where he and Sarah had gone on their first date. The irony wasn't lost on him. As he parked and stumbled out of the car, his legs suddenly felt too weak to support him. With shaking hands, he replayed the recording. Each word was a dagger to his heart, confirming that he hadn't imagined it. His wife, the woman he had vowed to love and cherish until death do them part, was nothing but a fraud. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Jack pulled out his phone again. This time, he wasn't recording. He was researching divorce laws, inheritance rights, anything that might give him an edge in the battle he knew was coming. He had never been one for confrontation. He was a history teacher, for God's sake. He dealt in facts and dates, not legal warfare. But as he sat there, watching families stroll by and couples holding hands, something inside him hardened. He'd be damned if he let Sarah and this Robert take everything he had worked for. By the time darkness fell, Jack had a plan. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He needed help, though, professional help. And he knew just who to call. The next morning found Jack sitting in the sleek, modern office of Diane Lopez, divorce attorney extraordinaire. She had a reputation for being a shark in the courtroom, which was exactly what Jack needed right now. Diane listened impassively as Jack recounted his story, her face betraying no emotion. When he finished, she leaned back in her leather chair, fingers steepled under her chin. "Well, Mr. Thornton, you've certainly found yourself in quite the predicament," she said, her voice cool and professional. "The good news is, you've got solid evidence of your wife's intentions. That recording will be invaluable." Jack nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since overhearing Sarah's conversation. "The bad news," Diane continued, "is that your wife clearly has a plan. And if she's been working on this for a while, she may have already taken steps to protect herself. We need to move quickly." She outlined a strategy that made Jack's head spin: gather more evidence, secure assets, prepare for a clean break. It all sounded so clinical, so devoid of emotion. But then again, maybe that was exactly what he needed right now. "One more thing, Mr. Thornton," Diane added as Jack stood to leave. "Don't tip your hand. Act normal until we're ready to make our move. Can you do that?" Jack thought about the betrayal, the lies, the years of his life wasted on a woman who saw him as nothing more than a meal ticket. He thought about the future he had planned, now turned to ashes. "Yes," he said, his voice hard. "I can do that." The drive home was a blur, his mind racing with everything Diane had told him. But as he pulled into the driveway, a sense of calm settled over him. He had a plan now. He wasn't helpless. He found Sarah in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, Jack's resolve wavered. How could this be the same woman who had so coldly discussed destroying his life? "Hey, honey," Sarah said, leaning in for a kiss. "How was your day?" Jack forced himself to smile, to act normal. "Oh, you know, the usual, kids who'd rather be anywhere but in class." He watched as Sarah turned back to her chopping, chattering away about her day at the office. How many times had they done this? How many evenings had he sat here, listening to her stories, thinking they were building a life together? "Sarah," he said, interrupting her mid-sentence. She turned, a look of confusion on her face. "What's wrong?" Jack took a deep breath. This was it, no turning back now. "I know about your plan," he said, his voice steady. "I know about Robert." The knife Sarah had been holding clattered to the floor. Her face went pale, then flushed red. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. Jack pulled out his phone and played the damning recording. As Sarah listened, her face cycled through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear. It was just a hypothetical conversation," she said weakly when the recording ended. "I was just talking to a friend about." "Save it," Jack cut her off. He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase. "These are divorce papers. I want you out of the house tonight." Sarah's demeanor changed in an instant. The mask of the loving wife fell away, revealing the cold, calculating woman beneath. "You can't do this," she hissed. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." But Jack was already moving, heading for their shared office. With quick, precise movements, he began canceling their joint credit cards and transferring funds from their shared accounts to ones in his name only. Sarah followed, her voice rising in pitch and volume as she hurled insults and threats. Jack tuned her out, focusing on the task at hand. When he finished, he turned to face her. "You have an hour to pack your things and leave," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property." As Sarah stomped off to pack, Jack felt a strange sense of detachment. This woman, this stranger in his house, was no longer his wife. She was an opponent. Nothing more. True to his word, an hour later, Jack changed the locks. He watched from the window as Sarah's car disappeared down the street, her taillights fading into the distance. He knew it wasn't over. Sarah wouldn't give up that easily. But for now, he had breathing room, time to plan his next move. The next morning, Jack met with Elena Ramirez, the principal of Jefferson High, where he taught. She was a stern woman with kind eyes, always fair but never a pushover. Jack had always respected her, and now he found himself grateful for her no-nonsense attitude. "Elena," he said, his voice grave. "I need to request an extended leave of absence. There's been a family emergency." Elena's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't press for details. "Of course, Jack. Take whatever time you need. Your students will miss you, but we can arrange for a substitute." Jack nodded, relief washing over him. One less loose end to worry about. Back at the house, Jack began the process of dismantling his life. He sold most of his belongings, keeping only essentials and a few sentimental items. It felt oddly liberating, shedding the trappings of his old life. As he worked, he thought about his father, William Thornton. They hadn't spoken in years, their relationship strained by old resentments and misunderstandings. But now, with Sarah's plan out in the open, Jack knew he had to warn him. The phone call was awkward, stilted. Jack didn't reveal the full extent of what had happened, just enough to put his father on guard against Sarah's machinations. "Dad," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we've had our differences, but please be careful. Sarah, she's not who we thought she was." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When William finally spoke, his voice was gruff but not unkind. "I appreciate the warning, son. Take care of yourself." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe, Jack thought, something good could come out of this mess after all. With his affairs in order and his father warned, Jack was ready for the final step of his plan. He needed to disappear. He withdrew a large amount of cash from his accounts, enough to live on for a while without leaving an electronic trail. He bought a used car from a private seller, paying in cash. Then, in the dead of night, he drove away from the life he had known, heading west with no real destination in mind. As the miles rolled by, Jack thought about Sarah. By now, she would have realized he was gone. He could imagine her frantic calls to their mutual friends, her increasingly desperate attempts to locate him through his workplace. But she would find nothing. Jack Thornton, high school history teacher and devoted husband, had vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks as Jack made his way across the country. He took odd jobs here and there, paying in cash and using fake names. He slept in cheap motels or in his car, always moving, never staying in one place long enough to be remembered. Finally, after nearly a month on the road, he found himself in Portland, Oregon. Something about the city called to him. Maybe it was the constant drizzle, matching his mood. Or maybe it was just far enough from his old life to feel safe. He found a small apartment in a nondescript neighborhood and started looking for work. His teaching credentials were useless now, using them would leave a trail Sarah could follow. But he had other skills. He started advertising his services as a private tutor, specializing in history and literature. Slowly, cautiously, Jack began to build a new life. He made a few acquaintances, though he was careful to keep everyone at arm's length. He couldn't risk getting close to anyone, not when his past could come crashing down on him at any moment. At night, alone in his sparse apartment, Jack would sometimes think about Sarah. He wondered if she was still with Robert, if they were already spending his father's money. He wondered if she ever felt guilty about what she had done. But mostly, he thought about the future. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly on his own, no wife, no job, no roots tying him down. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. He had a chance to reinvent himself, to become someone new. As the days turned into weeks and weeks into months, Jack slowly began to heal. The pain of Sarah's betrayal never fully went away, but it became duller, more manageable. He threw himself into his work, building a reputation as an excellent tutor. He even started developing online history courses, finding a new passion in bringing the past to life for students around the world. Jack Thornton, the betrayed husband and disillusioned teacher, was gone. In his place stood a new man, one forged in the crucible of betrayal and determination. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face it. Jack Thornton stared at his computer screen, the harsh glow illuminating his face in the dim Portland apartment. At 41, his hair had a bit more gray, and lines had formed around his eyes, but those eyes still held the same intensity they had 6 years ago when he fled Cincinnati. The clock on his desk read 2:17 a.m., another late night working on his online history courses. Who knew that abandoning his teaching career would lead him here? Turns out, there was a whole world of students hungry for knowledge beyond the confines of a traditional classroom. His phone buzzed, startling him. Who the hell would be calling at this hour? The number wasn't one he recognized, but it had a Cincinnati area code. His heart raced as he answered. Hello. Is this Jack Thornton? The voice was unfamiliar, clinical. Who's asking? This is Mercy Hospital in Cincinnati. I'm calling about your father, William Thornton. He's been admitted, and you're listed as his emergency contact. Jack's world tilted on its axis. His father, the man he hadn't spoken to in years, save for that cryptic warning about Sarah. How is he? Jack managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. The nurse's voice softened. I'm afraid it's quite serious, Mr. Thornton. Your father is asking for you. Jack closed his eyes, memories flooding back, the bitter arguments, the disappointment in his father's eyes, the years of silence. And now this. I'll be there as soon as I can, he heard himself say as he hung up. Jack's mind raced. Going back to Cincinnati meant facing everything he had run from, Sarah, the life he'd left behind, the possibility that his father's inheritance, the very thing that had sparked this whole mess, might now be within reach. He booked the first flight out, throwing clothes into a suitcase with trembling hands. As the plane took off, Jack stared out the window, watching Portland disappear beneath him. He was leaving behind 6 years of carefully constructed anonymity. What would he find waiting for him in Cincinnati? The hospital corridor seemed endless, the smell of disinfectant burning Jack's nostrils as he made his way to his father's room. He paused outside the door, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Nothing could have prepared him for the sight that greeted him. Sitting by his father's bedside was Sarah. His Sarah. The woman who had plotted to destroy him, now playing the role of doting daughter-in-law. She looked up as he entered, her eyes widening in shock. Jack, she gasped. Before he could respond, a weak voice came from the bed. Son, is that you? Jack turned to see his father, a frail shadow of the imposing man he had once been. William Thornton's eyes were sunken, his skin sallow, but a spark of life returned to them as he gazed at his long-lost son. Dad, Jack said, moving to the bedside. I'm here. William's hand trembled as he reached for Jack. I didn't think you'd come. Of course I came, Jack replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. He glanced at Sarah, who was watching the reunion with an unreadable expression. Jack, William said, his voice barely above a whisper. There's someone I want you to meet. He gestured weakly to the other side of the bed. Jack hadn't even noticed the other man in the room. As he looked up, he felt the floor drop out from under him. "This is Robert," William said. "Your uncle. He and Sarah have been taking care of me." Uncle Robert. The name from Sarah's phone call 6 years ago. The man she had planned to run away with. Jack's mind reeled as he struggled to process this new information. Robert stepped forward, offering his hand. "It's good to finally meet you, Jack. I've heard so much about you." Jack shook the hand automatically, feeling as if he had stepped into some bizarre alternate reality. His uncle, the man his wife had been involved with, was his own flesh and blood. As the shock began to wear off, Jack's analytical mind kicked in. He observed the way Sarah and Robert stood slightly apart, the nervous glances they exchanged. It was clear they had been working together, manipulating his father for years. A movement caught Jack's eye. A nurse had entered the room, her dark eyes taking in the tense scene. She moved to check William's vitals, offering Jack a sympathetic smile. "I'm Maria," she said softly. "I've been taking care of your father." It's good to see him smile again. Jack nodded, grateful for the momentary distraction. As Maria worked, he noticed her watching the interactions between Sarah, Robert, and his father with a furrowed brow. She seemed to sense the undercurrents of tension in the room. As Jack stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and this new unexpected player, he made a decision. He couldn't run away again. Not this time. His father needed him, and he needed answers. "I'm staying," he announced, meeting Sarah's startled gaze. "For as long as it takes." Robert clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that made Jack's skin crawl. "That's wonderful news, nephew. We have so much catching up to do." Jack forced a smile, his mind already formulating a plan. He had come back to Cincinnati to say goodbye to his father. Now, it seemed, he had a mystery to solve and a truth to uncover. As he settled into the chair by his father's bedside, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and treacherous journey. But this time, he was ready. This time, he wouldn't be caught off guard. "Let the games begin," he thought, watching Sarah and Robert exchange worried glances. "I'm not the same man who left 6 years ago. And this time, I'm not running away." The funeral was a somber affair, the kind William Thornton would have hated. Jack stood at the graveside, surrounded by people he barely recognized, all offering condolences with varying degrees of sincerity. Sarah and Robert hovered nearby, playing their parts to perfection. As the last of the mourners drifted away, Marcus Chun, the family attorney, approached Jack. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice low. "When you're ready, we need to discuss your father's will." Jack nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. He'd known this moment was inevitable, but that didn't make it any easier. The reading of the will took place in Marcus's office, a wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old books. Jack sat across from Sarah and Robert, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus cleared his throat and began to read. "I, William Thornton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath my estate as follows." What followed was unlike anything Jack had expected. His father, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic even in death. The will laid out a series of conditions, tasks that the potential heirs would need to complete to prove their loyalty and worthiness. "This is ridiculous," Sarah sputtered, her carefully crafted mask slipping for a moment. "We've been caring for William for years. Surely that counts for something." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The will is quite clear, Mrs. Thornton. All potential heirs must complete the tasks set forth." Robert leaned forward, his face a study in false concern. "But what about Jack? He abandoned the family. Surely he's not eligible." Jack felt a surge of anger but kept his voice calm. "I didn't abandon anyone. I left because of circumstances beyond my control." He met Sarah's eyes, watching her flinch at the implied accusation. Marcus held up a hand. Regardless of past events, the will states that all family members have the right to participate, including Jack. What followed was a bitter battle, fought not with fists or weapons but with legal maneuvers and carefully worded accusations. Sarah and Robert contested the will, throwing everything they had at discrediting Jack. But Jack wasn't without resources of his own. He presented evidence of Sarah's original plan, hinting at Robert's involvement without revealing his full hand. The recording he had made 6 years ago became a powerful weapon, though he used it sparingly, aware that it was his ace in the hole. As the days turned into weeks, Jack found himself immersed in a world of legal jargon and family politics. He discovered depths of strength he didn't know he possessed, standing firm against the onslaught of Sarah and Robert's machinations. But it wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. As Jack dug deeper, he began to uncover troubling inconsistencies in the family company's finances. Late-night research sessions and clandestine meetings with loyal employees painted a disturbing picture of embezzlement and fraud. One night, as Jack pored over financial records in his hotel room, he heard a soft knock at the door. He opened it to find Sarah standing there, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. He watched as she paced the room, wringing her hands. "I didn't know," she finally said. "About Robert. About the company. I swear, Jack, I had no idea how deep this went." Jack studied her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Why should I believe you?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Because I'm trapped, Jack. I made a terrible mistake, and now I don't know how to get out." As Sarah poured out her story, Jack felt a mix of emotions, anger, pity, and a grudging admiration for her survival instincts. She painted a picture of manipulation and deceit, with Robert as the puppet master pulling all the strings. When she finished, Jack remained silent for a long moment. "I can't trust you," he finally said. "But if what you're saying is true, we might be able to help each other." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "For now, nothing. Act normal. Let Robert think he's still in control. I'll be in touch." As Sarah left, Jack felt a glimmer of hope. He might have just gained an unexpected ally in this fight. But he couldn't let his guard down, not yet. Not when there was still so much at stake. Jack woke to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. Bleary-eyed, he reached for it, squinting at the screen. It was Elena Ramirez, his old principal from Jefferson High. "Jack, have you seen the news?" He sat up, instantly alert. "What news?" "It's all over the local stations. Sarah and Robert, they're saying terrible things about you. Elder abuse, abandonment, theft from the family business." "Jack, what's going on?" Jack's mind raced. He had expected Robert to fight dirty, but this was a declaration of war. He flipped on the TV, his stomach churning as he watched Sarah, tears in her eyes, recount how he had abandoned his family. Robert stood beside her, playing the role of the supportive uncle to perfection. "Jack Thornton is not the man we thought he was," Robert said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "He left his family behind, ignored his father's illness, and now he wants to swoop in and claim an inheritance he doesn't deserve." Jack's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from his online course platform. His ratings were plummeting, flooded with one-star reviews and accusations of fraud. "Damn it," he muttered, realizing the scope of Robert's attack. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. Robert was trying to destroy everything Jack had built. He needed allies, and fast. He dialed Elena back. "Elena, I need your help. Everything they're saying, it's not true. I can explain, but I need time." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Then what do you need?" Jack felt a surge of gratitude. "Can you reach out to my old colleagues, my students, anyone who knew me before? I need character witnesses, people who can vouch for me." Consider it done, Elena said. And Jack, we've got your back. As he hung up, Jack's mind was already formulating a plan. He couldn't match Robert's media blitz dollar for dollar, but he had something Robert didn't, the truth. He set up a live stream, reaching out to his online students around the world. For hours, he told his story, laying bare the betrayal that had driven him from Cincinnati. He showed evidence of his continued work in education, the lives he had touched through his online courses. As he spoke, messages of support flooded in, former students shared stories of how he had inspired them, colleagues vouched for his character, even some of his current online students, scattered across the globe, joined in to defend their teacher. But Robert wasn't done. As Jack's counteroffensive gained traction, his website came under attack. A sophisticated DDoS assault brought down his entire online infrastructure. Jack was at his wit's end when his phone rang again. This time, it was a voice from the past. Jack, it's Mike. Mike Lawson, remember me? Jack's mind flashed back to summers spent playing baseball, shared confidences, a friendship that had once seemed unbreakable. Mike? Yeah, of course. It's been a long time. Listen, I've been seeing what's happening on the news. It doesn't add up. The Jack I knew would never do the things they're saying. I'm a detective now. If you need help getting to the bottom of this, I'm in. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Mike, you have no idea how much that means. There's a lot I need to tell you. As Jack filled Mike in on the details of the past 6 years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The tide was turning. Robert and Sarah had overplayed their hand, and now the truth was starting to come out. But Jack knew this was just the beginning, the real battle was yet to come. As he ended the call, he steeled himself for what lay ahead. The inheritance, his reputation, his very future, it was all on the line. But for the first time since he returned to Cincinnati, Jack felt ready. He had allies, he had the truth on his side, and he had a score to settle. Let Robert and Sarah bring their war, he thought. I'm not running anymore. This ends here, one way or another. Jack Thornton sat in his dimly lit hotel room, surrounded by stacks of documents and a laptop screen glowing with financial records. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted but determined. The inheritance battle had taken its toll, but he knew he was close to uncovering something big. A knock at the door startled him. He opened it to find Kate Blackwell, the private investigator he had hired to dig into Robert's past. Her face was grim, her eyes sharp with purpose. We need to talk, she said, brushing past him into the room. Jack closed the door, his heart racing. What did you find? Kate pulled out a thick file from her bag. Your uncle's been a busy man, Jack, and not in a good way. For the next hour, Kate laid out a pattern of behavior that made Jack's stomach churn: elder abuse spanning years, multiple victims, fraud that went beyond the family company, touching businesses across the state, and most disturbing of all, connections to organized crime that hinted at even darker dealings. Jesus, Jack muttered, leafing through the evidence. This is worse than I thought. Kate nodded. Your uncle's made some powerful friends, and some dangerous enemies. You need to be careful, Jack. This goes beyond a family squabble now. Jack's mind raced. He needed to act, but he had to be smart about it. One wrong move and everything could come crashing down. I need to make a call, he said, reaching for his phone. The number he dialed wasn't one he'd ever used before, but it was one he had memorized just in case. When a woman's voice answered, Jack took a deep breath. This is Jack Thornton. I have information about Robert Thornton that the FBI might be interested in. Special Agent Samantha Torres listened intently as Jack laid out what he knew, careful to keep his own involvement anonymous. When he finished, there was a long pause. Mr. Thornton, if what you're saying is true, we'll need to move quickly. Can you come in to make a formal statement? Jack agreed, setting up a meeting for the next day. As he hung up, he felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The wheels were in motion now. There was no turning back. Over the next few weeks, Jack found himself living a double life. By day, he continued the inheritance battle, presenting a calm facade to Sarah and Robert. But his nights were filled with clandestine meetings with Agent Torres, poring over evidence and building a case against his uncle. To maintain his cover and begin rebuilding his tarnished reputation, Jack started volunteering at a local veterans center. The work was rewarding, giving him a sense of purpose beyond the legal battles and investigations. It was at the center that he ran into Maria Gonzalez, the nurse who had cared for his father. She was visiting her grandfather, a Korean War vet. "Jack," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." He explained about the volunteer work, watching as her face softened with understanding. "That's wonderful," she said. "These men and women, they've been through so much. It's good to see someone caring for them." As they talked, Jack found himself opening up to Maria in a way he hadn't with anyone since returning to Cincinnati. She listened without judgment, offering support and, occasionally, valuable information about Robert's visits to the hospital during William's illness. Their friendship grew over shared cups of terrible hospital coffee and late-night conversations. Jack found himself looking forward to their talks, a bright spot in the increasingly tense atmosphere of the inheritance battle. But even as Jack made progress, he could see Robert beginning to unravel. The man's behavior became erratic, his temper shorter. Sarah, caught between the two men, looked increasingly haggard and afraid. The diner was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow over the worn formica tables. Jack sat in a booth near the back, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, his eyes flicking to the door every few seconds, tension coiling in his gut. When Sarah walked in, he almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident woman he had married. In her place was someone smaller, hunched as if expecting a blow. "Jack," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "Thank you for meeting me." He nodded, studying her face. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the fear in her eyes was fresh. "I know about Robert's crimes," he said without preamble. "All of it, the elder abuse, the fraud, the mob connections. It's over, Sarah." She flinched, then sagged, as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "What are you going to do?" "The FBI is already involved, but they need more. They need someone on the inside." Jack leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "That's where you come in." Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to testify against Robert?" "Jack, you don't understand, he'll kill me." "We can protect you," Jack insisted. "But this is your chance, Sarah. Your chance to make things right." For a long moment, Sarah was silent, her fingers tracing patterns on the scratched tabletop. When she looked up, there was a determination in her eyes that Jack remembered from their early days together. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it. For William. For us. For everything I destroyed." Jack felt a weight lift from his chest. This was it, the final piece they needed to bring Robert down. As they stood to leave, the diner bell jingled. Jack looked up to see Robert standing in the doorway, his face a mask of rage. "You," Robert snarled, advancing on Sarah. "I knew you'd betray me." Everything happened in a blur. Robert reached into his jacket, pulling out a gun. Sarah screamed. Jack moved. Years of pent-up anger and betrayal fueled him as he lunged at Robert, his hand closing around his uncle's wrist, twisting the gun away. They grappled, crashing into tables and chairs. Jack was dimly aware of Sarah shouting, of the diner's other patrons fleeing, but his focus was entirely on Robert, on the madness in the other man's eyes. With a move he had learned during his years away, Jack managed to disarm Robert, sending the gun skittering across the floor. He pinned his uncle to the ground, panting heavily. "It's over," Jack growled. "You've lost." As if on cue, the diner's door burst open, and FBI agents poured in, led by Agent Torres. As they cuffed Robert, Jack became aware of a dull pain in his side. He looked down to see a growing red stain on his shirt. "Jack!" Sarah cried, rushing to his side. "Oh God, you're hurt." He waved her off, his eyes meeting Agent Torres. "Tell me you got all that on camera." The agent nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Every second." "You did good, Thornton." As paramedics swarmed around him, Jack felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was done. Finally, after all these years, it was done. The courtroom was packed, a low murmur of voices filling the air. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his side still tender from the knife wound Robert had managed to inflict during their struggle, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional weight of the past few months. As the judge entered and called the court to order, Jack's eyes swept the room. Sarah sat on the defendant's side, looking small and defeated. Robert, in his prison jumpsuit, glared daggers at anyone who dared meet his gaze. The proceedings moved quickly. FBI agent Torres presented the evidence gathered during their investigation, laying out a damning case of embezzlement, elder abuse, tax evasion, and attempted murder. When it was Jack's turn to testify, he stood tall, his voice steady as he recounted the events that had led them all to this moment. The recording of Sarah's phone call from 6 years ago played through the courtroom speakers, and Jack watched as the color drained from Robert's face. But the real surprise came when Marcus Chun, the family attorney, took the stand. The normally unflappable lawyer looked nervous as he cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he began. "I have a confession to make. For the past several years, I've been gathering evidence against Robert Thornton at the behest of the late William Thornton." A gasp went through the courtroom. Jack leaned forward, his heart pounding. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "William suspected Robert's criminal activities long before his death. He made me promise to keep silent until the truth could be revealed in full. The evidence I've collected corroborates everything Mr. Jack Thornton and the FBI have presented." As Marcus detailed years of Robert's misdeeds, Jack felt a complex mix of emotions: grief for his father, who had known the truth but couldn't share it, anger at the years of deception, and a bittersweet pride that William had, in his own way, been looking out for Jack all along. The judge's ruling, when it came, was decisive. Robert was found guilty on all counts, facing decades in prison. The family business and William's entire estate were awarded to Jack as the only remaining heir untainted by criminal activity. As Robert was led away in handcuffs, still hurling threats and insults, Jack felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Sarah standing there, tears streaming down her face. "Jack," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I have no right to ask this, but, can you ever forgive me?" Jack looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the woman who had betrayed him, but the girl he had fallen in love with all those years ago. He thought of all the pain, all the lost years, all the wounds that had haunted him. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. I need to let go of this anger if I'm ever going to move on. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. We can't go back. You understand that, right?" She nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I understand. Thank you, Jack, for everything." As Sarah walked away, Jack felt a chapter of his life closing. But instead of sadness, he felt a sense of possibility. He had his father's legacy to uphold, a chance to do some real good in the world. In the weeks that followed, Jack threw himself into establishing a foundation for education and elder care. He used his inheritance to fund scholarships for underprivileged students and to improve conditions in nursing homes across the state. As he stood at the podium during the foundation's opening ceremony, Jack thought about the long, twisted road that had led him here. He thought about his father, about Sarah, about Robert, about the man he had been and the man he had become. My father once told me that true strength isn't about how hard you can hit, Jack said to the assembled crowd. It's about how much you can take and keep moving forward. This foundation is about moving forward. It's about taking the pain of the past and turning it into hope for the future. As applause filled the auditorium, Jack felt, for the first time in years, truly at peace. He had faced his demons, righted the wrongs of the past, and found a purpose that gave his life meaning. The story of Jack Thornton, the betrayed husband and prodigal son, was over. But the story of Jack Thornton, the man who turned tragedy into triumph, was just beginning.